We don't know the who, we don't know the what, we don't know the where, we don't know the when, we don't know the why. Other than that, clear as day. So, uncertainty is a big deal in markets, in business, in the real economy, and internationally. And this is just fraught with uncertainty. You've got advisors to the president. You've got people who are by statute and otherwise empowered to speak on behalf of this administration on tariffs, which, by the way, is an Article 1 competence vested to Congress, but that's a different issue. It shouldn't be, but it is. And every single one of them went on the shows today, yesterday, the day before, and said, we don't know. That's a pretty scary landscape in which to approach multiple trillions of dollars of trade and economic performance.
So do you expect, I guess we should then ask, do you expect clarity this week? Because every time we get a deadline or a big announcement like this, the markets get all worked up, and we've seen a real reaction here in stocks and bonds. The president says, I just got off the phone with somebody, or there's a posting on Truth Social, we're going to kick this back for 30 days for review. When will there be clarity?
Well, I don't think there's going to be clarity on April 2nd. I think there's going to be some clarity on April 2nd. So what I mean by that is there'll be a big announcement. The president has boxed himself in. If he now had his advisors all convince him, this is a really bad idea, Mr. President, the markets, the economy, internationally, strategically, it's really bad, he's still boxed himself in. So I think there's going to be a set of big announcements on April 2nd. What happens thereafter is going to be a little bit less certain, meaning the retaliation and the response of a lot of other, both domestic and in particular international actors, is as yet uncertain, but that will play out over time. But I do think those who think that you're going to get this kick the can down the road on April 2nd are probably missing that April 2nd is going to be a big deal.
Well, I just wonder how big we are thinking when we're talking actual numbers. We just heard Peter Navarro suggesting $600 billion in revenue raised off of this. What does that suggest about what these actual figures might look like? Yeah,
well, so if you just take Peter Navarro at face value, that suggests tariffs of between 15 and 20%. I mean, it's a very back of the envelope.
Across the board.
Across the board. Because that would be just extrapolating how you get to $600 billion over each of the next 10 years. Obviously, it's a dynamic world. That things don't just play out in a linear way, and there will be retaliation. It's interesting, in the comment that you played from Peter Navarro, he talked about how this would be a great revenue enhancer without recognizing that the tariffs themselves represent probably the single biggest tax hike in the last 30 plus years in this country.
He calls them tax cuts.
He calls them tax cuts. That doesn't even get to the point where the other countries start to retaliate. So you've got some hesitation on the part of the EU, China, and others. They don't want to go down this route. They don't like huge tax hikes. But they're going to be forced to do them because if Trump is taking this stance, then they're going to be forced to retaliate. So you are in what is classically defined as a trade war.
So this becomes about philosophy. And there's this line that you hear about, it's, whoever spoke with Donald Trump last. You've got Peter Navarro on one shoulder, maybe Scott Bessent's on another shoulder. Who wins?
I'm convinced that Trump really does believe that a wholesale change in the way the American and global economy works is what is needed, and he seems to be willing to pay the price. I'm not sure he himself will pay the price, but Americans and everyone in the world will pay the price. So I'm more leaning towards I'm going to do big, I'm going to do structural, I'm going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and try and really upend the way the global economy operates and the U.S. role in that economy. And if there's what he would define as short-term pain, it's worth the longer-term gain. I'm not sure the gain is actually going to be a gain, and I certainly don't think it's worth the short-term pain.
Well, so when we consider the global economy, which area of it do you think ultimately, regionally, is going to feel the impacts of this most detrimentally? Because when we put collectively what Trump has talked about, even the threat of secondary tariffs on things like Russian oil, who buys that? India and China, who has big deficits with the U.S. already that Trump doesn't like. India and China, a lot of our biggest trade deficits are in Asian countries. Is that actually the area of focus, or does Europe have equal reason for concern here?
I don't think it's even remotely possible to say which region is going to suffer the most, because if you go down the route I described, where Trump is actually saying, I want to upend the global trading system, that's a global trading system. So you actually get to the point where the rules of the last 80 years, right? After World War II, we had the GATT, 1947. Then you had the WTO, 1995. these steps created a low tariff, free trade environment that everyone benefited from. If you're going to reverse that, then everybody's going to suffer. That doesn't mean I'm saying free trade didn't hurt certain countries and certain interests. Of course it did. There's no such thing as free trade. There shouldn't be. There have got to be checks and balances. But the idea of throwing out the entire system is one that will have global repercussions, and it's not going to help anyone. Now, one point I would make, it's not clear whether the rest of the world, potentially under, I can't believe I'm going to say this, Chinese leadership, could say, we're going to try and recreate a multilateral trading system on the basis of a non-U.S. participation in that system. That's not hard. That is hard to imagine,
Is that
but it's
the
not
definition
implausible.
of failure here?
Oh, I think that there are so many definitions of failure that I don't even know where to begin. I think the definition of failure is going to be when you see potentially supply chains that are upended and that tariffs lead to, and this whole structure leads to inflation, leads to, the big stagflation risk, and countries that are forced into retaliation when they don't want to do it. There's no reason for this.
So you said stagflation. Are you also willing to say recession? Is that a real risk at this point?
If you're defining recession as several quarters of zero to negative growth, yeah, sure. That's a possibility. I'm not calling for it, but could you see it? Yeah, because I think a lot of people are blissfully hoping that the more pro-market Trump administration voices will ultimately win the day, and they could. But in the meantime, let's go back to where we started. Uncertainty. Is anybody making a new investment? Is anybody doing a new M&A deal? Is anybody doing a new cross-border trade deal? Is anybody doing anything right now, or are they all paralyzed? And if you're paralyzed, that obviously is a direct impact on economic performance and growth. That leads to risks of recession.